going to climb Everest, I was met with quite a mixed response. I think there were a couple of people who thought I was just going to look at it, perhaps as a base camp trekker, and others thought I'd gone completely mad. And I guess, you know, I reached much of the same conclusion when I was sitting in my little yellow tent on a small ledge chipped into the Lhotse face, some 7,300 meters above sea level, waiting for the wind to die down so we could face our 48 hours in the death zone. Now, this Lhotse face rears up seemingly vertically from the western comb, and it's a solid wall of blue ice. And we jumad up and across in very high winds, which we hoped would have died as was forecasted by the time we reached the South Col. There you can see, it's very difficult to see actually, but they're tiny little people, gives you a great perspective on how far up we actually were. We just hung in our harnesses for a bit. Every 10 minutes, we'd sit there for another 10 minutes and then eventually realized we had to get going eventually. The first main obstacle in our path was this yellow band. And this is an immense ribbon of limestone that occurs at this altitude throughout the Himalayas. And it's as much as an obstacle to climbers on Choyu as it is on Everest, some 40 kilometers away. It looks fairly innocuous from the comforts of Camp 1 and Camp 2. But in actual fact, it's a pretty full-on rock climb without the benefit of rock shoes and a chalk bag. There's 2 rope systems, which is great. Some 15 kilometers of rope above the icefall this year on Everest. Gets you up that 30-foot rock face on up towards the Geneva Spur. Again, you can see just huge amounts of rock. It was very, very difficult to be climbing on this rock with these crampons. This was the meeting place of Lhotse and Everest, and has to be climbed and traversed in order to get to the South Col. It's a very short little distance from the top of the yellow band to the Geneva, around the base of the Geneva Spur, and it's across a rather gentle sloping bowl, although it's got one hell of a camber. If any of you have ever run 2 oceans, you will have remembered the camber at the top from the top of Constantia Neck to Kirstenbosch Top Gate, and I could feel my ankles grinding away painfully against my boot inners. Actually, when I took my boots off, it was just a bloody mess when I got to the South Col. And from the top of the yellow band to the top of the Geneva Spur, another 2 hours. And by this stage, the wind had died almost completely, and I was absolutely roasting in that suit. God, we got to this to this particular spot. The tents are out of the picture, but you can clearly see the route. Hell of a rocky. I don't know what I expected. I definitely hadn't expected a proper rock climb. The plan was to settle in and rest for a couple of hours and leave at 10:30, but it was pretty much impossible to sleep at that altitude. And 10:30, we got into that line of climbers and headed over that blue ice bulge. You know, we'd been briefed pretty thoroughly, but nobody had ever mentioned the South Summit rocks in that briefing. You know, think woody buttress, think doing it in crampons, and then put it 8,000 meters higher. And there you have the South Summit rocks. It was a jolly good scramble on any other day, but an energy and confidence thief at 7,800 meters. And at this point, I'd twice declared my intention to completely bail. I was going down. And then I saw this. This was the most incredible thing. I call it the ghost mountain. It's a phenomenon I've seen on many mountains. It's where the shadow of Everest is being cast off into the Himalaya by the sun rising on the Tibetan side. But of course, once we got to the South Summit, it was in the morning light. It was a huge psychological boost, and here we could see our tents. You can just make out the tents on the South Col below, and we'd been going for about 7 hours, and exhaustion was starting to set in. You know, reaching the South Summit is a huge milestone, but it's also very sobering. This was where Rob Hall sat down and slowly died in the '96 Everest disaster. And, you know, you wonder, you know, what lies in store for you. But it was 6 a.m. I knew we were well ahead of the noon turnaround time, and the foul weather 2 days before had got a whole lot of guys off the mountain, and we had it to ourselves pretty much. So the Hillary Step was next up. Now, I'd always imagined that the Hillary Step was going to be my nemesis, that it was this 30-foot unclimbable wall of snow and ice. I can picture Doug Scott's image of Dougal Haston climbing up the right-hand side. But we didn't have to do that. There's not a hell of a lot of snow up there anymore. And in fact, it's actually more of a rocky scramble that passes straight over the south face. So with the Hillary step out the way and not nearly as insurmountable as I'd imagined it to be, all that was left was another half an hour of upward slog. Just one foot in front of the other. The wind was starting to blow now, light breeze, it picked up. I was really, really cold at this stage, and I started to feel my toes go. And it's quite weird, you know, at that stage I actually didn't care. You know, people say, well, why do you let this happen? But for some reason, and it seems bizarre, it just seemed completely worth it to lose a few toes. And then suddenly there it was. Alex, I know you've got all yours and I've got all mine, but a few of my friends weren't so lucky this trip. There it is, top of the world ahead of you. You know, Mike and I, my guide, unclipped, and we took those last few steps. Any of you who've done comrades, you'll understand that golden mile, that feeling of, I've done it, and no one can take this away. When I got to the summit, I'd packed and I'd unpacked and I'd packed again all the things I wanted to take up. I had a picture of my 4 kids. I had a South African flag, and I couldn't find them. I can see them now. I can see them in that picture. It's all sort of stuffed around my bosom. But I couldn't find them at the time, and all I had energy for was to raise my hands and have a summit shot taken. People say, well, what do you see up there? I saw this picture, Alex, in one of your shots, the first one. There's Makalu. It's the 5th highest mountain in the world. It's Kanchenjunga in the far distance, 3rd highest mountain. Lhotse just being dwarfed in the foreground. And then you can see these other guys. I wondered, who were these other guys just coming up from nowhere? These are the guys coming up from the North Ridge. One of them was a 13-year-old Georgian Romero who set the record for the youngest to climb Everest. Absolutely incredible to see these people coming up from the Chinese side. It's the only point on the route that they actually meet. So, you know, what an incredible 48 hours. And I'm not sure I'm actually down yet. Although I'm missing a few feathers in my tail from coming down the Hillary step on my bottom, and I think I'm probably the only one who's ever done that. I know there's another 8,000 meter peak or 2 in that down suit.